They thought she was weak. They thought her silence meant she had no power. They thought age had taken everything from her, except her ability to endure. But what they didn't realize was that silence was not her weakness. It was her preparation, because sometimes the quietest people are the ones making the loudest decisions. That evening started like any other. A simple dinner table, plates placed neatly, the faint sound of utensils. A house filled with people, but empty of respect. She moved slowly, carefully, like she always did. Not because she couldn't move faster, but because life had taught her to stay small, to stay out of the way, to not disturb anyone. And maybe you understand that feeling of being present but not valued, of giving everything, but receiving nothing, of living in a place that no longer feels like home. She had built that house, not just with money, but with years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, endless compromises, moments where she chose others again and again, until she forgot how to choose herself. Every wall had her story, but now those same walls were witnessing something else: disrespect, silence, neglect. And then it happened. A moment so small, yet so powerful, it would change everything. The coffee cup at it wasn't just a cup at it was frustration, at it was anger, at it was disrespect. Thrown without thought, it flew from his hand and hit her arm. Hot liquid spilled across her skin, across the table, dripping slowly to the floor. But the real damage wasn't the burn. It was what came next. You eat, but you don't help. Those words didn't just land. They stayed. They echoed. They dug deep into a place she had been protecting for years. For a second, everything went quiet. Not outside, but inside her. Her hands froze, her breath slowed. Her eyes didn't even blink, because when pain becomes too familiar, you don't react anymore. You just absorb it. And before she could even process it, the plate was slammed down in front of her, loud, sharp, disrespectful. Like she was nothing. Like she didn't belong there. Like she had no right to even sit at that table. And maybe you felt that too. That moment when someone makes you feel small, in a place where you should feel safe. That moment when your worth is questioned by people who should have protected it. She looked at him. Not with anger. Not with fear. But with something deeper, something breaking, something shifting. But she didn't speak, she didn't shout, she didn't defend herself. And that's where most people misunderstand strength. Because they think strength is reacting. They think power is proving yourself in the moment. But real strength is when you stay silent and make a decision that changes everything. She slowly moved her hand away from the table, wiped the coffee from her arm, and sat there, still, calm. But inside a storm had begun, because something inside her finally asked a question. How long will I keep living like this? That question, it doesn't come often, but when it comes, it changes everything, because it forces you to face the truth that you've been ignoring. The truth that you've been hiding behind patience, behind sacrifice, behind silence. She wasn't respected, she wasn't valued, she was tolerated, and tolerated only as long as she stayed quiet. That realization hurt. But it also woke her up. Because pain has two purposes. It can break you, or it can build you. And in that moment, without saying a single word, she chose not to argue, not to beg, not to explain her worth to people who had already decided not to see it. She chose something more powerful. She chose change. That night, she didn't sit with them again. She quietly stood up from the table, walked to her room, and closed the door. No drama, no noise. Just a soft click. But that sound, that small, quiet sound, was the beginning of a completely new life. Inside her room, the silence felt different. Not heavy, not painful, but honest. For the first time in years, she wasn't pretending. She sat down slowly, her hands resting on her lap, her eyes staring at nothing, yet seeing everything. Every memory came back. Every sacrifice. Every moment she chose others over herself. Every time she swallowed her words, just to keep peace. And suddenly tears filled her eyes. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears, falling slowly, like everything she had been holding inside. But here's the thing about those tears. They weren't weakness. They were release. Because sometimes you have to break inside before you can rebuild yourself stronger. She looked around her room, to the walls, to the things she had collected over the years. And she realized something powerful. I gave my whole life to this place. But I lost myself in the process. That realization, it hits differently because it forces you to see that sometimes the life you built is the very thing that's holding you back. and that's a hard truth to accept. But it's also the first step toward freedom. Outside the room, everything was normal: voices, movements, life going on like nothing happened. But inside that room, a transformation had begun. A quiet one, a powerful one. Because she wasn't thinking about the pain anymore, she was thinking about her worth. And once you start thinking about your worth, everything changes. The way you see people changes. The way you see yourself changes. The way you tolerate things changes. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked outside into the dark night. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel trapped. She felt aware. Aware that she had choices. Aware that she didn't have to stay. Aware that her life was still hers. And in that moment, she made a decision. A quiet one, a strong one, a dangerous one. She decided, this will never happen again. No shouting. No announcement, just a decision. And decisions like that, they don't just change moments, they change lives. But what she planned next, what she did after that night, no one could have imagined. Not him. Not anyone in that house, because they were still seeing the old version of her. The quiet one. The patient one. The one who would never leave. But they were wrong. Completely wrong. Because the moment a person realizes their worth, they become unstoppable. And what she was about to do would prove exactly that. But before we continue, if you're still watching this, if something in this story is touching your heart, then don't ignore that feeling, because that feeling is your truth. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay till the end, because this is not just her story. This might be your wake-up call. And in the next part, you're going to see how silence turns into action, how pain turns into power, and how one decision can change everything. That night, she didn't sleep. Not because she was hurt, but because something inside her had finally woken up. There's a difference. Pain keeps you stuck, but awareness changes everything. She sat there in the darkness, her room quiet, the world outside asleep, but her mind louder than ever. Every word from that evening echoed again. You eat but you don't help. Again, and again, and again. But this time, she didn't feel weak hearing it. She felt something else, clarity. Because for the first time, she wasn't just hearing the words, she was understanding the reality behind them. This wasn't about one moment. This wasn't about one argument. This was years of being ignored, years of being taken for granted, years of slowly becoming invisible. In a life she built with her own hands, and suddenly, everything made sense. Every time she stayed quiet. Every time she chose peace over respect. Every time she told herself, it's okay, let it go. It wasn't okay, and deep down, she always knew it, but she kept ignoring it. Because sometimes we lie to ourselves just to survive. But that night, she stopped lying, she faced the truth. And the truth was painful. She wasn't being loved, she was being used. She wasn't being respected, she was being tolerated. And the moment you realize that, you can never go back to who you were before. Her breathing slowed. Her thoughts became sharper, and in that silence, a powerful thought entered her mind. Respect is not given, it is taught. She repeated it again and again, until it became real, because suddenly, she saw her life from a different angle. She saw how every time she accepted disrespect, she was teaching people how to treat her. She saw how her silence was not protecting her. It was hurting her, and that realization, it didn't break her. It rebuilt her, because now she understood something most people never do. If you don't set boundaries, people will set them for you, and those boundaries will never be in your favor. She stood up slowly, walked to the mirror, and looked at herself. Really looked, not at her age, not at her wrinkles, not at the tiredness in her eyes, but at the person she had become. And for a moment she didn't recognize herself, because somewhere along the way, she had lost her voice, lost her confidence, lost her identity. And in that moment she made another decision, not just to leave the situation, but to find herself again. Because leaving a place is one thing, but rebuilding yourself, that's the real journey. The night grew deeper, but instead of feeling heavy, it felt different. It felt like preparation. Because she wasn't thinking emotionally anymore. She was thinking strategically, calm, focused, clear. Because when emotions settle, power begins. She sat down, took a deep breath, and started planning. Not loudly, not dramatically, but carefully, because she knew one thing. If she was going to change her life, she had to do it right. No mistakes, no noise, no warnings. Just action. The next morning, The sun rose like any other day, light entered the house, people moved around, voices filled the space. Everything looked normal, but inside her, everything had changed. She woke up early. Not out of habit, but out of purpose. Her movements were calm, her face expressionless, because when you've made a decision that big, you don't need to show it. She walked into the kitchen, prepared her tea, sat quietly and observed how people spoke to her. Observed how they ignored her presence. Observed how nothing had changed, except her, and that observation made her even stronger. Because now she wasn't guessing anymore. She was seeing the truth clearly, and once you see the truth clearly, you stop making excuses. She didn't argue, she didn't bring up what happened, she didn't try to fix anything, because she understood something powerful. You cannot fix a place where you are not valued. You can only leave it. Later that day, she picked up her phone. Her hands were steady, her mind was clear, her heart calm, and she dialed a number. Point 1. Call. Point 1. Decision. One step closer to freedom. Hello? I want to sell my house. Simple words, but behind those words was a lifetime of courage. On the other side, questions were asked, details discussed, meetings planned, but she didn't hesitate, because hesitation belongs to doubt, and she had moved beyond doubt. This wasn't an emotional reaction. This was a calculated move. Days started passing, quietly, meetings happened, documents were prepared, signatures were done. Everything was moving forward, without anyone in that house knowing. And that's what made it powerful, because real change doesn't always announce itself. It builds, silently, like a storm forming far away, until one day, it arrives and changes everything. She continued her routine, same movements, same silence, same calm presence, but inside she was transforming piece by piece, thought by thought, because every day she reminded herself of one thing: I deserve better. Not loudly, not emotionally, but firmly, and that belief became her strength, because the moment you truly believe you deserve better, you stop accepting less, and people don't even realize it, until it's too late. Days turned into nights, nights turned into decisions, and everything was aligning perfectly. But here's where it gets intense, because the final step, the final move she made, was something no one saw coming. Not even for a second. And when it happened, it didn't just shock them. It changed everything. But before we go there, pause for a moment. Look at your own life. Ask yourself honestly. Where are you staying? Where you are not respected? Where are you silent when you should be strong? Where are you accepting less than you deserve? Because this story, it's not just about her, it's about you. Your choices, your life, your power, and maybe, just maybe, this is your moment to wake up to. If you're still here, still listening, then don't ignore this feeling. Because this is not just motivation, this is a message. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay till the end. Because in the next part you're going to witness the most powerful move of her life. The night she walked away and never looked back. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like something is about to happen. Everyone was asleep. But she was awake. Not because she had to be, but because this was the night. The night everything would change. She sat on the edge of her bed, hands resting gently, eyes calm, breathing steady, and no panic, and no confusion, and no fear, just clarity. Because when you've made a decision from deep within, there is no noise left inside you, only direction. She slowly stood up, looked around her room. Not at things, but at memories. This wasn't just a room. This was her life. Every corner held a piece of her story. The curtain she chose years ago, the cupboard she filled slowly, the bed where she spent countless nights thinking, worrying, sacrificing, and for a moment time slowed down, because letting go even of pain is never easy. And maybe you know this feeling when something hurts you, but it's also familiar when something breaks you, but it's also what you've known for years. That's the hardest kind of thing to leave. Not because it's good, but because it's known. She walked toward her cupboard, opened it slowly. The sound was soft, almost like the house itself was whispering goodbye. She began taking out her clothes, folding them carefully, not rushing, not shaking, because this wasn't escape. This was a decision, a powerful one. Every fold, every movement, carried meaning. Because she wasn't just packing clothes, she was packing her past, piece by piece, memory by memory. She picked up an old shawl, paused, ran her fingers over it, and suddenly, a memory flashed. A winter night, years ago, when everything felt warm, when laughter filled the house, when respect still existed. A tear rolled down her cheek, not because she wanted to stay, but because she realized how much had changed, and that realization, it hurts. But it also frees you, because it shows you the truth. You're not leaving something good, you're leaving something that used to be good. And there's a big difference. She placed the shawl gently into her bag, closed her eyes for a second and whispered softly, "Thank you, but I choose myself now." Those words, they weren't loud, but they were powerful because for the first time, she was choosing herself without guilt. And that is one of the hardest things a person can do. She continued packing slowly, carefully, deliberately, because every action tonight was a step toward her new life outside her room. The house remained still, unaware, unprepared, because people often don't realize what they have until it's gone, and tonight, they were about to learn that lesson. The clock ticked, time moved, but inside her, everything felt still, calm, focused, unshakable. She zipped her bag, lifted it gently, and looked around the room one last time. Not searching, not questioning, just seeing it for what it was, a chapter. Not her entire story, and that realization changed everything, because when you stop seeing something as your whole life, it becomes easier to leave it behind. She walked toward the door, her steps slow but firm, each step echoing softly in the silence. She reached for the handle, paused. Not out of fear, but out of awareness, because she knew once she opened this door, there was no going back. And that moment, that exact moment, is where most people stop. Where fear enters, where doubt whispers. What if you're making a mistake? What if you regret this? What if you're wrong? But here's the truth: growth always feels like a risk, change always feels uncomfortable, and walking away from what you've known will always feel scary. But staying in a place that breaks you? That's even scarier. She took a deep breath, and in that breath, she let go of fear. She opened the door and stepped out. The hallway was dark, silent, peaceful, but also final, because this wasn't just a walk. This was a transition from pain to power, from silence to self-respect, from surviving to living. She walked slowly through the house, each step bringing memories: the living room, where she once sat with family; the kitchen, where she cooked countless meals; the table, where respect was lost. She paused there for just a second, looked at the table, and remembered that moment. The coffee, the words, the silence, and instead of pain, she felt strength, because that moment didn't break her. It woke her up. She placed her hand lightly on the table and said softly, "That was the last time." No anger, no bitterness, just closure. And then, she moved on. Because that's what strong people do. They don't stay in moments that hurt them. They grow beyond them. She reached the main door, placed her hand on it, and for a second, the world felt still again. Because this was the final step. She turned the handle, opened the door. Cool air touched her face. Fresh, free, different. And in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: freedom. Not because everything was perfect, but because she had chosen herself. She stepped outside, closed the door behind her, and that sound, that simple, quiet sound, marked the end of one life and the beginning of another. She didn't look back immediately, because sometimes looking back pulls you back. But after a few steps, she paused, turned around, and looked at the house one last time. Not with sadness, not with regret, but with understanding, because now she knew that house was never her identity. It was just a place. And her life was much bigger than that. She gave a small nod, almost like saying goodbye. Not to the house, but to the version of herself who stayed too long, and then she walked away. Calmly, silently, powerfully, into the unknown, into a new chapter, into a life where she would never accept less than she deserved again. And back inside that house, everything was still, unaware, unchanged for now, but morning was coming, and with it reality, shock, consequences. Because when someone you underestimated finally takes control of their life, it doesn't just surprise you. It shakes your entire world. But what happened the next morning, what they discovered, what they realized too late, that's where this story becomes unforgettable. So stay with me, because in the next part, you're going to witness the moment when silence turns into shock, when disrespect meets consequence, and when one woman's decision changes everything forever. If you've made it this far, don't stop now. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to find Their strength, because the next part is where everything explodes. Morning came, soft light slipped through the windows, touching the same walls, the same furniture, the same house that had witnessed everything, but something was different. Something was missing. First, no one noticed, because when people get used to your presence, they stop appreciating it. They assume you'll always be there. They assume you'll always tolerate. They assume you'll never leave. So the house moved like any other morning. Footsteps in the hallway. The sound of water running. A chair being pulled. Normal, completely normal. But sometimes, the biggest changes begin in the most ordinary moments. One of them walked past her room. The door slightly open. No sound inside. No movement. No presence. A small pause. A quick glance, and then confusion because something didn't feel right. They pushed the door open. And that's when it hit. The room was empty. Not messy. Not disturbed. Empty. Too empty. The cupboard, open. The shelves, cleared. The small things, gone. It didn't look like someone left in a rush. It looked like someone left with a plan. And in that moment, a strange feeling entered the air. Not panic yet. Not fear, but something deeper, uneasiness, because deep down they knew this wasn't normal. They called her name once, twice, again. But the house didn't answer. Only silence, and suddenly, that silence felt different. Not peaceful. Not calm. But heavy. Like it was holding something back. They checked the kitchen. Nothing. The living room. Nothing. Every corner. Nothing. And with every step, the confusion started turning into concern. Where did she go? How did she leave? Why didn't she say anything? Questions filled the space, but answers? There were none. Because sometimes, the answers don't come immediately. Sometimes, they arrive all at once, and when they do, they hit hard. Phones came out. Calls were made again, but no answer. Because she wasn't just unavailable, she had moved on. And that's the part people struggle to accept. When someone you thought would always stay finally chooses to leave. First, they were confused. Then slightly worried, but still they didn't fully understand, because they were still seeing her as the same quiet woman, the same patient person, the same one who would never take a step like this, but they were about to realize they were wrong, completely wrong. Time passed. Minutes felt longer, voices became louder, tension started building, because now it wasn't just confusion. It was discomfort. Because absence reveals value, and slowly, they started to feel it. The emptiness. The missing presence. The silence that once felt normal now felt unbearable. And then one call changed everything. A call they didn't expect. A call they weren't ready for. Information, simple, clear, shocking. The house has been sold. Silence. Complete silence. Because sometimes words hit so hard that your mind refuses to process them. They looked at each other, trying to understand, trying to deny, trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense to them. How is that possible? When did this happen? Why didn't we know? But the truth was simple. They didn't know because they never paid attention. They didn't notice her pain. They didn't notice her silence. They didn't notice her change. And now they were noticing her absence too late. Because while they were living their normal lives, she was making life-changing decisions. Quietly, carefully, powerfully. That's what real strength looks like. Not noise. Not arguments, but action. And now, they were standing in a house that was no longer theirs. The same house they felt comfortable in. The same house where they disrespected her. The same house they thought would always be there, gone just like that. And in that moment reality hit. Not slowly, not gently, but all at once, because consequences don't wait for you to be ready, they come when it's time. And this was their time. Voices rose, blame started, confusion turned into anger. But none of it mattered because the decision was already made. The process was already complete. And she was already gone. Far from the noise, far from the disrespect. Far from the place that once felt like her whole world, and somewhere, in a quiet space, she sat peacefully, no pressure, no tension, no fear. Just silence, but this time, it was a peaceful silence. The kind of silence that heals you. The kind of silence that reminds you, you made the right choice. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and felt something she hadn't felt in years, relief. Not because everything was perfect, but because she was finally free. Free from explaining herself. Free from tolerating disrespect. Free from shrinking herself to fit into a space that never valued her. And in that moment she smiled. A small smile. But a powerful one. Because it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about reclaiming her life. And that is the strongest thing a person can do. But here's the truth you need to understand. Most people wait too long. They wait for things to get better. They wait for people to change. They wait for the right time. But the right time is the moment you realize your worth. And she realized it. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. And that realization changed everything. So now let me ask you something. Where in your life are you still waiting? Where are you tolerating something you know you shouldn't? Where are you staying when your soul is telling you to leave? Because this story, it's not just about her. It's about you, your decisions, your courage, your life. And maybe, just maybe, this is your moment. The moment where you stop waiting and start choosing yourself. Because if she can do it, after years of silence, after years of sacrifice, then so can you. But we're not done yet. Because the final part of this story is the most powerful one. It's not about what she left behind. It's about what she found, her strength, her identity, her new beginning. So stay with me. Because in the last part, you're going to discover what happens after you choose yourself. And how one decision can completely transform your life. You've come this far. Don't stop now. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Because the final part might just change everything for you. Let me tell you something slowly, clearly, so it stays with you. You are not a burden. You are not useless. And you are not meant to live a life where your presence is tolerated instead of valued. But the truth is, most people don't realize this until something breaks them. Just like it broke her. But here's the difference. That moment didn't destroy her. It revealed her. Because sometimes, life doesn't test you to see your weakness. It tests you to show you your strength. And after everything that happened, after the silence, the pain, the decision, the walk away, her real journey began. Not in that house, but outside it, in a place where she had nothing familiar, no routine, no people she depended on, no space she could call her own. Yet, just herself. And for many people, that's the scariest place to be. Alone with your thoughts, with your decisions, with your reality. But here's what most people don't understand. That's also the most powerful place to be. Because when you have nothing but yourself, you finally meet who you really are. The first few days, they weren't easy, let's be honest. There were moments of silence that felt heavy, moments where memories came back. Moments where her mind asked questions. Did I do the right thing? Was I too harsh? Could I have stayed just a little longer? And if you've ever made a big decision in your life, you know this feeling. Doubt doesn't disappear immediately. It whispers, it tests you, it tries to pull you back into your comfort zone. But she didn't go back. Because deep inside, she knew something had changed, something permanent, something powerful. She reminded herself of that night, that moment at the table, those words, that feeling, and suddenly, her doubt turned into strength again. Because when you remember why you left, you stop wanting to go back. Days turned into weeks, and slowly she began rebuilding. Not just her life, but herself. She started small, simple routines, quiet mornings, moments where she just sat with herself without fear, without pressure, and something beautiful started happening. She started feeling lighter. Not because her problems disappeared, but because she was no longer carrying what didn't belong to her: disrespect, neglect, silence forced upon her. All gone. And in that space, she found something she had lost for years: peace. Real peace. The kind that doesn't depend on anyone else. The kind that comes from knowing, I chose myself. And that changes everything. Her confidence started returning. Not loudly, not suddenly, but step by step. She spoke more clearly, she walked with more strength, she thought differently. Because when you remove yourself from negativity, you don't just escape it, you transform. And people around her started noticing. Not the people from her past, but new people, people who saw her value without her needing to prove it. People who respected her presence without her needing to beg for it. And that's when she realized something powerful. The world treats you the way you allow it to. If you accept less, you receive less. If you demand respect, you attract it. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to demand it. Time passed, life moved forward, and one day she sat quietly reflecting on everything, from that painful moment to this peaceful place, and she smiled again. Not because life was perfect, but because she was no longer the same person. She had grown. She had evolved. She had become someone who knew her worth and refused to settle for less. And that is the real success. Not money, not status, not proving others wrong, but becoming someone who respects themselves enough to walk away from anything that doesn't. Now listen carefully because this part is for you. Yes, you, the one listening right now, the one who feels stuck, the one who feels unappreciated, the one who is silently tahmilu, just like she was. You have a choice. Right now, in this moment. You can keep waiting, hoping things will change, or you can become the person who creates that change. Because no one is coming to save you. No one will suddenly realize your worth. If you keep hiding it, you have to show it. Not through words, but through decisions, through boundaries, through the courage to say, enough is enough. And I know it's not easy, I know it's scary, I know your mind will tell you to stay where it's comfortable. But remember, this comfort is not always safe. Sometimes, comfort is the place where your growth dies. And if you want a better life, you have to be willing to feel uncomfortable, to take risks, to choose yourself. Even when it feels selfish. Because it's not selfish, that it's necessary. You deserve respect. You deserve peace. You deserve a life where you are valued, not tolerated. And the moment you truly believe that, your life will start changing. Just like hers did. So today, make a decision, a quiet one, a strong one, a life-changing one. Decide that you will no longer accept less than you deserve. Decide that your peace matters. Decide that your life is yours. And once you decide, don't announce it, don't argue about it. Just act, silently, powerfully, consistently, and watch what happens, because one day, you'll look back at this moment and realize this was the turning point. This was the day you stopped surviving and started living. That if this story touched your heart, if it gave you strength, if it made you see your life differently, then don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today, because sometimes one story, one moment, one decision can change everything. And who knows, maybe today, that change begins with you. Until next time, stay strong, stay aware, and never forget your worth. Because the moment you do, the world will, too.